Let's dive into the story of two aircraft from World War II. It's a story of incredible innovation, but one that was born from absolute desperation. You have one plane, a formidable long-range bomber, a real symbol of air power. And then you have the other, a plane designed with only one mission in mind: to never return. So, take a look at this. It's called the Oka, and during the final, brutal year of the war, this tiny craft became one of the most feared and frankly shocking weapons in the entire Pacific. Its design was brutally simple, but its mission, well, that was anything but. And that's really the heart of it, right there. The Oka was, for all intents and purposes, a human-guided missile. There was no landing gear, no plan for a return journey. Its one and only job was to deliver a massive warhead to its target, with a single pilot guiding it all the way in. So this whole idea, a plane that was never meant to land, it's just central to this whole story. So let's take a closer look at what this weapon actually was.
The Japanese name for it, Oka, actually translates to cherry blossom. And in Japanese culture, that's a really powerful symbol of transient beauty, which is, well, it's pretty fitting, isn't it? It was a purpose-built aircraft designed from the ground up to be a piloted bomb. So here's the thing. The Oka couldn't take off on its own. It didn't have a normal engine, just a few solid fuel rockets for that final terrifying dive. So how in the world did it get close enough to an enemy fleet to actually be used? Well, that's where the second part of our story comes in.
It needed a ride, and that job fell to a mothership, one of Japan's most famous and widely produced bombers of the entire war. Meet the Mitsubishi G4M. It was a land-based twin-engine bomber, but to Allied forces, it was known by its reporting name, Betty. In the early years of the war, this plane was a true symbol of Japan's impressive air power. And right here, you can see the transformation. On the left, you've got the G4M in its original role as a torpedo and conventional bomber. Pretty standard stuff, but on the right, whoa. It's been completely modified into something new, a carrier for the Oka. This really shows you how a conventional weapon was adapted for a totally unconventional, and let's be honest, desperate purpose.
You see, the G4M's original design was a real game changer. It was built with one primary goal: range. We're talking an incredible reach of over 3,700 miles. But to get that, the designers made a massive trade-off. They sacrificed heavy armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, all for speed and distance. And that one decision would end up defining both its greatest successes and its most tragic failures.
And that trade-off, range over protection, well, it led to a fatal flaw that earned the Betty a really grim reputation among Allied pilots. They called it the flying lighter, sometimes even the one-shot lighter. And yet, that wasn't a term of endearment. It was a pretty stark description of what would happen when this bomber came under fire. And you can see exactly why they called it that. The G4M's huge wings were basically giant, unprotected fuel tanks. All it took was a few well-placed shots from an enemy fighter, and the whole thing could, and often did, just erupt into a massive ball of fire. Okay, so fast forward to 1944. The tide of the war has turned dramatically against Japan. The Allies are closing in, they're running out of experienced pilots, and conventional tactics just aren't working anymore. It's this atmosphere of pure desperation, fueled by seeing bombers like the Betty shot down left and right, that pushed military planners to consider the extreme. And this timeline, man, it just shows you how quickly everything escalated. As conventional tactics failed and the losses just kept piling up, the idea of special attack units started to gain traction. In August 1944, a naval pilot actually puts forward the idea for the Oka, and by the end of that same year, the design is approved and it's being rushed into production, just startlingly fast.
The Oka itself was a marvel of deadly simplicity. I mean, it was built mostly of wood to conserve precious metals. But look at that warhead. We're talking over 2,600 pounds of high explosive packed right into the nose. And for power, just 3 simple solid fuel rockets in the tail, which were fired off for that final dive.
Okay, so now let's put the two pieces together, the vulnerable mothership and its deadly payload. This combination created one of the most dangerous missions of the entire war, for everyone involved.
So here's how it was supposed to go down. The Betty, flying super slow and heavy with this thing strapped underneath, had to somehow get within 20 miles of an enemy fleet. That was the most dangerous part. If it survived, it would release the Oka. The Oka pilot would then glide for a bit before firing the rockets for a final, terrifying dive at over 600 miles per hour. And this is the brutal reality of the whole tactic. The Betty's flying lighter vulnerability was magnified tenfold on these missions. Intercepting fighters just swarmed these slow bombers, and many were shot down long before they even reached their launch point, taking the Betty's entire crew of 7 and the Oka pilot with them.
So this brings us to the really complex legacy of the G4M bomber itself. It's an aircraft that had 2 completely different identities. And we shouldn't forget that the Betty was, on its own, a significant piece of aviation engineering. Throughout the war, it was continuously improved, with more powerful engines, while still managing to maintain that incredible range. It was a frontline bomber from the start of the war right to the very end.
And this just lays it all out, doesn't it? The 2 lives of the G4M. It started the war as the symbol of Japan's technological prowess and strategic reach. It ended the war as, basically, a flying hearse, an instrument of a desperate, last-ditch strategy that sacrificed not just the Oka pilot, but so often its own crew, too.
And get this, in total, over 2,400 of these G4M bombers were produced. That number alone tells you just how central this aircraft was to Japan's war effort, from its initial triumphs all the way to its devastating final chapter.
So we're left with this story of a bomber and its payload, the Betty and the Cherry Blossom. One was designed for immense distance, the other for an inescapable final impact. It really forces us to ask, what does this dual legacy tell us about how technology and human strategy get pushed to their absolute limits in times of conflict?